Hello. I'm here with a good friend of mine, Garrett Johnson. We met through the ministry Courage International, which is an organization that especially helps people with same-sex attraction come to the faith and really be able to receive the fullest of truth in the Catholic Christian faith. And I had the opportunity to connect with him a couple weeks ago and hear his story. And I really thought that it was a very edifying conversation, and I wanted to bring it to you guys here on the channel. So, yeah, with that being said, this is my friend Garrett, and we will get started. Garrett, so, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe from childhood, wherever you're comfortable. You know, what was your experience of the faith growing up, if you had any, and how did you come to the faith of Catholic Christianity?
I was born into a my the family that I was born into. My mother was Catholic. My mother is Catholic still. My father was, I would say, agnostic. He may have described himself as an atheist, but I think he did believe there was something. He just didn't know what. My there was really not a lot of involvement with my father in our faith. We went to church on Sundays, holy days. Well, not holy days. We went to church on Sundays, Christmas and Easter. That was it. I don't have a lot of memories of us actively practicing our faith. When I brought that up to my mom, she says that we did used to pray before I went to bed at night. So I
Yeah.
trust that she's not crazy. So um, the relationship with I have one brother. I
Okay.
wasn't very close to my brother. There's a 7-year age difference. My relationship with my dad was good in the beginning. I don't have a lot of memories of that being a good relationship. I have pictures that my mother took that show me like laying in his arms and doing things like that. So they show me that there was a level of comfort with him at a certain point. But there
Yeah.
was a point when I was maybe 10, 11 years old, maybe a little earlier, where my father, I believe, started to suffer from an increase in anxiety and depression. Um, and my brother started having problems with drugs and alcohol. So everything just got kind of messed up in our family. I think our family was messed up. That's why my brother started
Yeah.
using drugs. But my perception of it at that age was that my brother messed it up by doing those things. My
Hmm.
dad kind of pushed back. I don't think he knew how to handle that. And I started becoming closer to my mother. At the
Yeah.
same time, people in school started calling me gay.
Hmm.
Uh, so all of that kind of came together. Being introduced to sexuality, the first time was in first grade. So that's like, I don't know, maybe 9 or 8, 7, something like that, where I had no concept of sexuality. I'm 52 years old. When I was growing up, children were preserved from being exposed to sexual things, unlike today, unfortunately. So
Hmm.
I didn't even know what that meant, but I knew it was not positive. And
Yeah.
eventually, I took classes and found what being gay meant, which was very confusing to me because I was not attracted to men or boys my age. I was attracted to girls in a very innocent way.
Yeah.
But that was kind of hammered into my head over and over, being bullied. My brother started telling me that I was not really a man, and my relationship with my father and my brother was not good. So I
Hmm.
just started to believe that. And then at a certain point, I was exposed to pornography around 11 years old, 10 years old. So I was taught through porn that human beings were something to be used, that they were not. Um, they were objects, to body parts, basically. And
Yeah.
at a certain point, after looking at porn with men and women in it for a while, I got bored and I started looking at the man in the pornography instead of the woman. And that was very disturbing to me because I
Yeah.
did not think of myself that way. Um, but the drum beat of your day, you're more like a man. I'm more like a woman than a man. And
Wow.
eventually, I was confused. I didn't have a relationship where I could discuss those kinds of things with my dad or my mother. Um,
Hmm.
and I just went with it. I mean, the girls that I was attracted to, whenever there came an opportunity for me to interact with them, I was super shy. You know, like I describe it as the kind of shy that makes girls uncomfortable. You know, they think the guy
Yeah.
is kind of creepy because you just like I would stare at them, and if they saw me looking, I'd look away because I just had no idea how to interact with them.
Yeah.
They took that as me being gay when it was really just shyness.
Hmm.
So there was this, I was being basically attacked from every angle. My sexuality was being attacked, and
Hmm.
around the end of high school, I just decided to stop fighting and to give in and try being what everyone said I was.
I see. And so I guess, did you feel like, and this is just to kind of capture maybe a nuance here. When you say try, did you feel like you had to force yourself, or do you feel like it was kind of a natural giving in? Like, I kind of, to the extent that you're comfortable, sort of decipher that a little bit.
I mean, once I started looking at the men in pornography rather than the women, obviously something had changed in um, my understanding of myself. I mean, I always, in hindsight, I understand that I didn't know there was a difference between lust and attraction.
Mm,
Lust, desire to use someone, that's not what being attracted to someone is. I was attracted to women, but the feeling
mm,
that I had towards men was extremely intense. And I've heard it described this way by other people with same-sex attraction, that it's like it's, I don't know how to describe it. It's extremely powerful because I think there's so many things that underlie it, you know, that you don't feel like a man yourself, and you see something in this man that you want to be like or you
yeah,
want for yourself, but you don't know how to get it. And
yeah,
culture is teaching you through pornography that the way you connect with people is through sex.
yeah,
Um, so I don't think that I would have naturally gone in that direction if I had not been exposed to pornography. And I don't think
mm,
I would have gone in that direction if people weren't telling me at a very young age that behavior that had nothing to do with sex meant something about my sexuality, meaning
hmm,
I like to talk, you know, rather than roughhouse.
yeah,
That was assigned a meaning that was sexual when it had nothing to do with sex.
mm,
So doing that kind of thing, and you see that now, where you know if a boy is more drawn to music or a girl is more drawn to, you know, building things, society
yeah,
will push them in a direction and say that means that you want to have sex with the same sex.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think be outside of that happening that I would have
yeah,
necessarily naturally gone in that direction.
yeah, yeah. I see. Okay. No, and it's kind of crazy because, like, looking today, at the amount of stuff people are exposed to, kids especially, right? Exposed to just crazy, not just ideologies, but visual stimuli that is very sexually suggestive, and you know the kind of consequences and implications that that has, um, on the mind, the psyche of the child. No matter which direction, whether you go in the direction of same-sex attraction or you struggle with lust in the other direction, right? The kind of contortion, the kind of spiritual malalignment, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane. It's so crazy to think that it's so much worse as the years go by because technology advances and stuff like that. So I in a sense kind of get what you're saying. um
I mean,
and
there's a
oh, go
book
on.
that I've been reading this from Father Alban Butler. It's The Lives of
Okay.
the Saints. It's a 7 volume set
Go on.
that was printed in 1833. So it's
Okay.
obviously older saints. But one of the patterns that I picked up on it, because I read it every day, is there were children that their parents could tell there was something different about them. And what they did was they directed them towards religion. We don't
Okay.
do that anymore. Now, if people think there's something different about their child, they start thinking it's something sexual, which is
Mm,
understandable because everything in our culture is sexualized. Everything. You
yeah.
see an ad for bubble gum, and you have to have the people chewing the gum making out because why else chew gum except because you don't want your breath to stink when you make out with your whoever you just met at the club. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
everywhere, and so children don't get the chance to naturally develop anymore. from like you
Yeah.
said. I mean, there's cartoons on PBS where there's a gay character. Why is
Yeah.
that necessary?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's really crazy, and like I think that I think it was Pope Francis that said something along the lines of how same-sex union, same-sex marriage especially is a machination of the devil designed to confuse children. And the
Mhm.
first time I heard that, I didn't quite understand what that meant, you know, because I'm like, okay, like I get that it's like it's bad, and the first time I heard it, I wasn't a Catholic Christian yet, so I wasn't quite sure what he was getting at. But once I realized it, when same-sex marriage was legalized, what, in like 2014, something like that. Um, you know, I remember at the time being like what, like freshman year of high school, kind of celebrating it, being like, oh, that's really cool that like, the government sort of acknowledging it. And now that I'm like 26 now, I'm like, oh, I see what happened. That was a play by the devil to, confuse children to be like, oh, marriage and love and all these feelings you have, it's all the same. It doesn't matter. It's like, no, no, no. There was something there. It was quite literally a machinized process by the devil to try and genuinely confuse kids to engage in, premature exposure to lustful attraction. And so, yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying there. What was the book series you recommended again, one more time, so that
Called The
way.
Lives of the Saints from Father Alban Butler.
Okay, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, I remember this. No, and I'll put that in the link for people to buy. I'll probably try and find something. But yeah, so with all that being said, though, you're now post high school and you're going to go all in on this, right? Same-sex attraction. You've been, exposed to something you probably shouldn't have been exposed to for sure. What did that look like? How did you feel like you were more free, or did you feel like maybe a sense of gratification, but then slowly over time you begin to realize something was off? I guess to kind of explain that era of your life.
I mean, when I first left high school, I got a job at a fast food restaurant, and I started drinking. And I started drinking heavily as soon as I started drinking. I never tried drugs or did anything during high school. I think in part because I saw what happened with my own brother.
Yeah.
Um, and so the drinking, we started hanging out when we were drinking. Then we started going to clubs. And then one of my friends decided we should start going to gay clubs because they liked the music better, was the excuse that this person had, which I ended up finding out later that this person also identified as gay. So it was just a way to get us into the club without them acknowledging their attraction. And I felt very comfortable. I wasn't comfortable when we first went because I was afraid people were going to be able to tell I was gay there. But what I found comforting was I was considered to be one of the words that is still used to describe people that at the time I was growing up was negative was a pretty boy. If someone
Mm,
said you were a pretty boy, it was not a compliment. It was basically saying you were more like a woman, you looked like a woman, you were overly concerned with your appearance, which was considered to be feminine at the time. Um, but when I went into the club, there were a lot of pretty boys. There were men that were obviously wearing foundation. They weren't made up to look like women, but they were wearing something to kind of even their skin tone out. Their hair was perfect. They were
mm,
obviously exercising. Their clothes were very well groomed, and they were being celebrated. So I was
mm,
drawn to the idea that this thing that had been something that had been used against me for so long, I was now in an environment where it was being celebrated. So I
mm.
quickly went from being uncomfortable to being uh, wanting to be there all the time.
Okay.
People that I initially started hanging around. First, I went with my friends from high school, but then one of my friends from high school had a friend that was basically I guess they would be considered a trans person now. I mean, at the time they were called a drag queen. That was the
Yeah.
terminology used. I don't think they use that anymore, but he wasn't taking hormones or anything, but he definitely wore makeup and wore clothes that looked like women's clothes.
Hmm.
And then we had another friend that was more like me, where he was kind of a regular looking guy, but he was pretty. He was very, very groomed. Um, in ways that would not even register with people now. I mean, the idea that we waxed our eyebrows was considered to be bizarre at the time. And now I think it's very common for men in general to do things like that. But I started hanging around them and I started taking on their traits. One of the things I think is common with people who don't have a strong sense of their own identity is that when they get around people who seem to have a strong sense, you tend to take on whatever identity they had taken on. So I started plucking my eyebrows. My eyebrows got to be very thin. I had no facial hair. I would wear foundation. I had my ears pierced. I had my nose pierced. I wore clothes that were more androgynous. And but at the same time that I thought I was living the way I made me comfortable, I drank a lot, like all the time. Whenever I was out, I would drink to the point frequently of blacking out, and I'd wake up in the morning in my bed and have no idea how I got there. Thank God I never killed anybody driving home like that. But so while I would say that the way I perceived it in my mind was that I was loving my life, you know, and that I was living my best life and all that kind of stuff, the idea that I had to drink so much to live my best life indicates that you weren't really living your best life because you wouldn't need alcohol for that. So that went on some time, about 10 years I lived that way.
Yeah. No, yeah, I would say that, like, even for me, kind of seeing my friends, especially even friends that I knew in high school, where, I get to see them graduate and then see them spend the next, at this point, 4 to 8 years of their life, basically claiming the same thing. They're living their best life. They're drinking every weekend. Like, they live paycheck to paycheck, not in the sense that they're taking on any responsibility, but every paycheck is an excuse to go clubbing and stuff like that. And, like, I remember at first feeling like a sense of sorrow for them, and I couldn't quite explain it until, like, I converted, right? And I was like, oh, I feel sad for them, not because I pity them, but
Mhm.
more so because it's like I know what they want is a sense of meaning in life. And I think that's kind of an important nuance to have, is what people want is they want meaning in life, right? Pleasure and compulsion and gratification aside, these people, you yourself included, me included, right? We all want meaning. We all want to feel like we're drawn to something, and instead of it being, right, the source of truth, goodness, and beauty of the universe, our Lord Jesus Christ, people replace that with partying, clubbing, all these other things, um, not realizing that dedication they put to drinking and clubbing and quote unquote living your best life uh, can be done in a much more fulfilling way. But because the world is so adamant on, you know, the pride of life, the Apostle John calls it, they don't even know that the way you can orient your life to, seek after that meaning is by, binding yourself to the cross of our Lord, right? Bear your cross and deny yourself and all that stuff. So with that, I kind of want to maybe segue into, you're living this life. You're partying, you're drinking, you're doing all these things. You're living your best life, and yet you seem to, it seems like something's not quite right. What was that? Why did you feel like, okay, maybe something's not right? When did you begin to realize, like, okay, this isn't it for me. I need to do something else.
Well, there was one. I mean, I at one point I found out that one of the friends that had taken me to the club in the first place, when I found out that he identified as gay, he was very different from me. He was very masculine. You know, he shaved his head, he had a beard, and that kind of, I was like, I realized that I didn't have to fall into necessarily looking like what I thought a gay person was supposed to look like. So I shaved my head and I went to the club the following week, and somebody came up to me in the club and told me I was confusing people and that I needed to make up my mind whether I was a boy or a girl, because evidently when I was dressing the way I was dressing, people were assuming that that was me indicating that I was more like a woman, which is understandable if you look more like a woman.
Yeah.
When that was kind of something that when that happened, I realized they were trying to tell me I had to, even in this community that was supposed to be accepting of of everyone being whoever they really truly were, they didn't really mean it. They still expected you to fall into some sort of category that made sense to them. I think
Yeah.
that's probably different today, but I think it's still there in its own way. Where, like, if you were to say you were a trans person, but you were conservative, that would
Mm.
put you in a certain position where people would say you can't be conservative and be that. And it's like, oh, so you're not really free to be who you are, even in this community. So that was kind of something that made me start to question things. I was raised, one of the great things about my father is that he taught me to question everything. Um, the church, the government, the police. He told me, you always, if they can't tell you why they're telling you something, then you don't believe it because they don't know what they're talking about. Now, that's
Mm.
obviously not true because everybody can't explain everything, but it
Yeah.
did give me that background where even when I was living this way, I was asking myself, why am I doing certain things?
Yeah.
Um, and I did get to the point where I just didn't, I did not, somebody, I had a client, I'm a hairstylist, that's my
Mm.
profession. Um, and she told me, I referred someone to you and I told them you're a great hairdresser and you're gay. And I said, why did you feel the need to say I was gay? And she said, well, you are. And I said, well, it's not who I am. I'm
Yeah.
me. My name is Garrett Johnson. I may be attracted to men and I may cut hair for a living, but I am not a hairdresser and I am not gay. She was just kind of like, whatever, you know. But
Yeah.
so that was always part of me, even though I was trying to fit in. I was trying to fit in without having to um, have someone else telling me what or who I really was
Yeah.
because nothing really made sense to me. I mean, when you're attracted to girls, but you're sexually attracted to men, and you're emotionally attracted to women, and your father is distant, and you're closer to your mother, and there's all this. There's just nothing that really lined up for me. So instead of letting other people tell me what that meant about me, I just started backing away from uh, the club scene and spending more time at home alone getting high. I transferred my addiction from alcohol to marijuana and started
Mm.
smoking very heavily. The people I hung around with at the club moved away, so I didn't really want to be in that environment alone.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what brought about some changes in a negative way because I was
Mm.
alone and getting high, and I was becoming more paranoid and really realizing that my life was not what I thought it should be at that age.
Yeah.
Um, God worked through all that to kind of push me to start asking questions like, why am I here? What is the point of
Mm.
me being alive if all I do is look at porn and get high? And at the time I was playing video games. I was basically living like a teenager, even though I was in my 30s
Mm.
at that point.
Yeah. No, continual pleasure seeking. I kind of noticed an interesting irony of, you know, non-religious individuals, atheist, Gnostic, whatever it is, sort of bash on religious people for being legalistic, and yet they kind of inadvertently became the very thing that they pretend they're not, right? The people that say, oh, don't judge, don't categorize people, don't put people in these little boxes, tend to be the very people that put that at the apex of their personality. Oh, this is you. You are in this box, therefore you're supposed to do this, this, and this, and I will introduce you as such. And that's an interesting kind of observation. I just kind of realized, people that kind of lead with a certain identity rather than just sort of leading with who and how they are as people, which is one observation. But I guess my question for you would be, you're living your best life, right? You're getting to play video games. It sounds pretty awesome. You get to smoke weed. Other people love to smoke weed. Do all these things that bring about pleasure. Yet here you are. You're saying that it wasn't, fulfilling, perhaps. Why was that? I'm kind of curious.
Well, I mean, everything I do, I tend to do to the extreme level. I don't really do anything moderately. When I was going out to clubs, I was going 6 days a week. When I drank to the point of blacking out. When I
Mm,
was getting high, I got to the point where I was smoking so much weed that I wasn't. Usually, marijuana makes people hungry. I wouldn't eat,
yeah.
and I would get dehydrated, and I would vomit, and I would have chest pain, and I was paranoid, and I'd lost a lot of
Mm,
my all of my friends, and my family relationships were terrible. They were terrible before I started smoking weed, but it just made everything worse. And I was
mm,
aware enough of the fact that, well, what started happening was I started messing up. My career was going pretty well, but I was smoking so much that I started losing clients. As I lost clients and lost money, I smoked less. And as I
mm,
smoked less, that's when I started thinking something is missing. I obviously had been raised in the Catholic Church, so even though I never stopped believing in God. I just stopped liking Him. I didn't want anyone telling me what to do or trying to have any authority over me. I
mm,
basically, at a very early age, rejected my father's authority, and I did it very forcefully because my father
yeah.
taught me through his behavior to be aggressive. And
Mhm,
so where a lot of people I know with same-sex attraction respond to the aggression of the men in their life by becoming more passive. My response to the aggression in my life was become super aggressive, not to the point of fighting or anything, but using my mouth, being
mm,
very nasty, hateful, spiteful, biting person to where anything you said to me, I had something nasty to say, and you would get to the point where you just wouldn't say anything.
mm,
Um, so I was miserable. I mean, that's what changed things for me is I did everything that I thought was going to make me feel better. I thought if I can just get away from people, if I can just eliminate men from my life, because my father and my brother had caused me problems in my mind, and my
mm,
peers bullied me. I only had one really close male friend outside of the gay community. So I
yeah.
just decided I'm just not going to have anything to do with men at all. I'll just cut them all off and
Yeah.
sit in my apartment and use substances to numb myself.
Mm,
But once I started losing money and smoking less, my mind cleared some, and that was when I really started wondering why. Why did God create me? What is the point? All I do is
mm,
get high, look at porn, and play games, and just go through this cycle. Um,
yeah.
and so I decided that I wanted a change. And I was on
Yeah.
YouTube at the time, and people on there started encouraging me to maybe try to just take a day off, which really
Mm,
scared me. And that showed me um, how deeply weed was impacting me. That the idea of just not smoking for one day emotional stress.
yeah.
Um, but eventually, I tried that, and it was God in that allowed me to feel what it was like to not be high,
Yeah.
even though it was only one day. And I decided I wanted more of that.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thought. I've noticed even for me living in Seattle, I'm like everyone that I know that does weed does it kind of all in. Like it's kind of in a way a part of their identity. And I never
Mm-hmm.
could figure out why, but I think it's in a sense people not wanting to admit that like yeah, there's some kind of spiritual influence here that keeps you from doing it moderately. Like I don't necessarily meet people that smoke or do weed in any way moderately. It tends to be kind of like routine to some extent. But you said something earlier that kind of caught my mind and my attention, which was I didn't necessarily reject God. I just didn't like him, which is an interesting thought in my mind because most people, I should say a lot of people, probably a better way to put it, they don't, you know, act as if God is real and then what's the word for it? Then ignore it, but rather they are of the disposition that God isn't in fact real, and so therefore nothing matters. But for you, it's something else here. It's you acknowledge a creator, you just don't care. I guess my question for you would be like, you know, this whole time you acknowledge that there was a God and you just didn't care. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, because there were friends of mine, like my best friend from high school, that ended up coming out as being gay, and we were very close. When we were together, we would have discussions. Like at the time, gay marriage was being discussed, and neither
Mm,
one of us agreed with that. But if we were to talk to you, and you said you didn't agree with gay marriage, then we would pile on you. You could
mm,
not say that you weren't for it. But when we were
yeah,
alone in my apartment getting high and playing games, and if we turned on the news and they were talking about some bill trying to be passed, we both acknowledged that we did not think it was right, that marriage is between a man and a woman and that's it.
yeah,
Um, so there's a lot of, I think people are not honest with themselves. I don't know if it's intentional or if it's something they're doing subconsciously and they don't know they're doing it.
hmm,
Things that I don't believe in don't bother me. If you told me you believed in Bigfoot, I would not care. I wouldn't feel the need to sit here and send messages back and forth with you, debating whether that footprint that they have in plaster is real or not. And oh, look,
yeah,
that toenail doesn't match that. And the kinds of things that people go through to try to disprove something that they say doesn't matter to them, I think
yeah,
shows that it doesn't matter because they wouldn't spend so much time. Because what is Christianity or Catholicism doing that to people that choose to believe it that is so
yeah,
harmful? Nothing.
mm,
Nothing. If I choose to reject the gay identity, that's my business. It's not affecting any other gay person, except that by me doing it and them hearing about it, it causes them to question something in their own life that they don't want to question. And that's why
hmm,
I think you see people fighting against religious people or fighting against people that don't believe in transgenderism or don't believe in gay marriage, why people are so angry about it. Because I think
yeah,
our stance against it triggers the knowledge they have buried in themselves that tells them that we are correct, that our understanding is correct.
yeah,
Um, so
yeah, yeah. No, and I think that it's interesting that I even have some friends will say to me, you know, you want people to live in accordance with what God says. I want people to live, and they would say it like this: I want people to live as if God isn't real. Kind of inadvertently, kind of saying the truth, not intentionally, but like they kind of accidentally say it. And I've caught that, and some of my friends who are non-believers, right? And they're like, I want people to do whatever they want. I want them to act as if God isn't real. And I'm like, hold on, do you not hear yourself just say that? Which and I find that to be interesting. So, like for you, all this time, you felt that, or I would say knew that the most logical conclusion for the explanation of the universe and the cosmos was that there was a creator, like the whole time.
yeah, I mean, I questioned like evolution and things like that, and I was always like, just because uh, uh, a monkey from 1,000 years ago looks different than a monkey now, and it may have evolved over that time, doesn't mean that
Yeah,
God didn't create the monkey. So
yeah,
that kind of thing never was difficult for me
mm,
it never eliminated, just because there were things that didn't make sense to other people, didn't necessarily mean to me that it eliminated the possibility that God was real. It just meant that there are certain
yeah,
things that I don't understand or that people cannot explain. And a lot of people that did tell me they could explain it, when I started to ask them questions, they would start fumbling all over themselves. And they
yeah,
were no more capable of explaining their non belief in God than a lot of people are at explaining their belief. So it
yeah,
didn't sway me either way. Um, I just didn't. I didn't want. There was no one that was going to be authority over me. I still. I mean, I don't know. Just the way I said that right now, it's still
yeah,
something that's in me. It's not gone.
yeah,
It's something I have to live consciously against and fight against by
yeah,
allowing people to have authority over me by choice. But it's very deeply ingrained in me that nobody is going to tell me what to do.
yeah.
Um, and I think
Okay.
that's what we have created in our culture is you decide what's right for you, and nobody can tell you anything otherwise. And once you implant that idea in a young mind and have them form themselves around that idea, and then to expect them to then submit to the authority of the church is very difficult. I'm not saying it's
Yeah, it's a very big disposition change for sure.
yeah.
Even from, for me, going from Protestant to Catholic, like,
Mm-hmm.
even C.S. Lewis would say, C.S. Lewis being a high church Protestant and Anglican was saying that, like, to go from Anglican to Catholic, it is a huge, huge world of difference because you're not just submitting to the authority of the church in the past and the present, but the future also. And so to tell, a non-believer, atheist, maybe same-sex attraction, perhaps liberal in their political disposition, that not only are you being asked to obey the abstract concept of God and Christ and the Holy Spirit, all that. But then, fine tune that a bit, the authority of the Holy Catholic Church and then the priest that you're going to, that's a big world, a worldview change. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's, you're right. It is a very difficult thing. And I think that, you know, that's kind of one of those moves that the devil, I would argue, has made in modern times to infuse just a very high degree of ambiguity, right? In order for the youth to be led astray. People like myself, you, when you were younger, to be led astray um, and be lost in your own pride, right? To be lost in, your inability to say, okay, I can voluntarily choose to obey and submit to a source of authority, even against my own will. And not only that, that voluntary, obedience, it's not just going to be something that is morally right, but even what's best for me, both spiritually, emotionally, and even, physically in many ways, right? And like that, in the mind of somebody, whatever, 14, 13, up to any age, really, that is insane, right? But nevertheless, to maybe kind of get back to the main story here, we're going through all this and you're kind of implicitly acknowledging the existence of a creator. I guess, when did it start to turn around? Like, when was it for you that you realized, okay, enough is enough, something's not right, and you start to take those first few steps towards Christianity? What was the turning point like for you? Was it, at a very low point, at a high point? What was that like?
Well, I mean, the low point for me was I decided after taking one day off, and then I started consistently taking 2 days off, and then 3 days off a week from getting high, that I wanted to stop. And two things happened. I came home from, well, three things. I came home from work, and I started digging through the trash to find weed to smoke. Then I was out one day, and somebody was crossing in the crosswalk. I let them cross and I went past, and they just started screaming at me. And I got out of my car and acted in a very aggressive way towards this person. And then I had a dog at the time, and he growled at me, and I grabbed him by his throat and started to choke him. Um, those were the things that I knew that I could not do this. Previous to that happening, I'd started instituting small disciplines in my life. My father lived a very structured life. I don't remember him ever having a schedule like I ended up creating for myself, where I started off with just making myself make the bed every day, and I hated it. And I knew there was something wrong with the fact that something so simple bothered me so much. So I
Yeah,
made myself do that every day, and then I wouldn't floss my teeth. I made myself start with my teeth, and then I had to hang my clothes up, and I had to do the dishes, and I had
yeah,
these things all out. So that all led to a point where I decided I was going to stop. And what I'd started doing was, my mother had come back to the Catholic Church,
mm,
and I decided I wanted to start just praying for 5 minutes a day and reading scripture for 5 minutes a day. So I would set the timer. I would roll up my sleeve, timer. I would go sit and read scripture. Then I would pray, and then I would get high. I was aware of the fact that I needed to let Jesus mix in with my addictions or my compulsive behaviors. The image I had in my head was of a washing machine that had a divider in it. And if you put the soap on one side and the dirty clothes on the other, nothing would get clean. You had to have the soap and the dirty clothes mix. So that was the way I
yeah,
viewed smoking and praying.
Yeah.
That this was all I was capable of, and that in my mind, I didn't know very much about Christianity at the time, and I just figured God was fine with me at least doing that. It was better than nothing. So one day during prayer, I just said to him, I don't want to smoke, and I can't help it. I can't control myself. And I started crying. And I said to God, if you'll help me stop, I'll do whatever you want.
Mm.
Within a few months of that, I decided to go stay with my parents for a week. I thought if I was away for a week and not having access to weed, that I would be able to control myself. So I went up there. I didn't smoke for a week. And when I came home, I never got high again.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I knew immediately that God had done that Jesus had done that for me, because there was no way I could have gone from as unstable as I was without weed and as attached to it as I was, and to just stop. My parents didn't think it was possible. Nobody that knew me thought it was possible. So
Yeah.
that was when everything changed. There were things changing that led up to it, but that was when there was really, the weed just stopped. There were no more substances being used in my life, and so I just dove into Christian. Why I didn't want to be Catholic. I hated the Catholic Church because of Protestant ideas that we worship the Pope, we worship statues, and all this other stuff. And I was just like, I don't need that. All I need is Jesus. So that was where I started. But that was the big turning point.
Okay. Yeah. And something that I sort of noticed you talk about, you know, kind of the genuine willingness to acknowledge that the thing you do want to do, or the thing that you don't want to do, whether it be smoking or being addicted to whatever it is, pornography or alcohol, sometimes it takes you just willing to say that you do desire those things and that you want to begin the process of not desiring it before you get to the point of like just saying, I don't want this anymore. Because sometimes that's not entirely honest. And it sounds like for you, that took a few months to kind of even decipher that language,
Right.
and then decipher the capacity to say it while also maintaining the fortitude to realize, no, this is something that happened very slowly over the course of time. You know, I forgot what the saying was, but it's something like, it sometimes takes a few years of effort for something to change overnight, right?
Mm,
Then that's kind of what happens here with addiction, right?
right.
Sometimes it takes a few years of few months, few weeks, few days, even few whatever, something, some quantity of time of just trying to understand the nuances of it before it changes overnight. And so that sounds like what's happened to you, right?
Yeah.
Something similar happened with me. Um, but you're praying at this point. You're reading scripture, but you're starting to realize, okay, I need to let go of this one thing. Um, I guess what did the first few steps look like after you're like, okay, I need some sense of discipline in my life, and you're sort of seeing that that discipline is pointing you towards Christ, and you stop smoking weed overnight. Uh, what did it look like after that? What did life look like? Did things immediately get better? Did they get worse before they got better?
They got better fairly quickly as far as that was concerned. I mean, I was able to um, start to reconnect with people. I mean, I really did, because marijuana doesn't necessarily, at least marijuana at that time, marijuana is different now because it's legal and it's been genetically altered and all these other things. But at the time that I was smoking it, once it's out of your system, it's out of your system. I mean, it has to get out of I think it, whatever, like 40 days or something. I don't know what the amount of time is, but I had no desire to smoke. I
Okay.
mean, intermittently I would dream about it, or I'd have a bad day and be drawn towards, escaping in some way. But for
Yeah.
me, I still had video games. So there was
Mm,
still a way to escape without necessarily getting high.
yeah.
And I was still using pornography. So I still had outlets that were unhealthy, obviously, but there were still ways for me to get what I was getting from weed in a certain way without having to go back. And because I was doing all of this on YouTube, and I've made a lot of videos on YouTube that followed me from wanting to quit to having quit, those are all still, I deleted my channel at one point, but I put all those videos back up recently.
Mm.
But knowing that people were watching me helped, because I started getting emails and comments from people telling me, like, I had a guy that said he was in high school and that someone offered him weed and he thought of me and he didn't get high. That was awesome to me to know that
Yeah.
and I've always said, people said, you did such a great thing. You helped so many people. I wasn't trying to help anybody. I like talking about myself. So,
Mm.
did God work through it? Yes, but I'm not going to sit back and act like I had this angelic plan of helping other potheads. I couldn't have cared less. But I
Yeah.
started seeing that in being open about my struggle, being open meant telling people when I stumbled and fell, and when I got high when I said I wouldn't, and when I was
Yeah.
tempted to porn or whatever else. Um, that really motivated me to stay away from it even when I was tempted.
Yeah.
Um, Other things, just then I started realizing that video games and weed were connected. There was no way for me to continue games because they really are repetitive and boring after a while. I mean, I think of the reason a lot of people play online is because you get some sort of social, or at least a feeling of being socially connected to people through it. But when you're just
Yeah.
sitting there playing alone, for me at least, it becomes boring very quickly.
Yeah.
I realized that was another thing that I needed to let go of, because it was also like when I was praying more and more and spending more time with Jesus in prayer, and I would be thinking about video games. And I was like,
Mm.
cool. When I'm praying, I want to be focused on prayer, and then I want this to be separate. And if it can't be, then it needs to go. So
Yeah.
that was the next thing that and I was back, I think, because I know that when I've read things that I've written about it, I was giving gaming up for Lent. So by that point, I had started to be more open to coming back to the Catholic Church because of my
Yeah.
mother, who had become an RCIA teacher, who gently, I have parents that have asked me, what advice would you give parents as far as trying to get their kids back? You got to understand that your kids have to go through whatever they have to go through. You can't beat it into them. They've been confirmed, they've received communion, they've got what they need to stay connected to Jesus. You just need to stay connected to them and contradict the lies, which is all she did. I would say, we all worship the Pope. She was like, no, we have respect for the Pope because he's the leader of the church on earth. Things like that. We worship the Virgin Mary. No, we reverence the Virgin Mary. So all of that was happening at the same time. Things falling away and Jesus stepping into the void that was left by weed and left by stepping away
Yeah.
from games. And
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And I guess so. You kind of mentioned briefly, not liking the church, and then a lot of it just because misconceptions. But here you are, Catholic Christian. What one thing? I guess those are two questions. One thing would be what got you into the Catholic Church despite the misconceptions, and then number two, why not go the Protestant route? That sort of stemmed from the notion of like in some ways easier to be a Protestant than it is to be a Catholic, right? Um, yeah, I guess how would you answer those two questions? First, obviously, being again, um, you know, how did you overcome those misconceptions? And then number two, why not just go the Protestant route?
the Protestants that I was interacting with on the internet, none of them agreed. They all had their own Jesus, was how I viewed it. One person's Jesus said it's okay to get married to another person. One person's Jesus said this does matter. One said this doesn't matter. And they just ignored the fact that none of them agreed on anything. They just acted like it didn't matter. And I just kept thinking, it doesn't make sense to me that God would want us confused. It's hard enough to follow him and to live the way he calls us to live. He's not going to confuse us even further by having 1,200 different interpretations of the same verse. So
Mm,
my thought was, the church is 2,000 years old and your pastor is 30. So if I have to decide whether I'm going to trust a 2,000-year-old or a 30-year-old, I'll go with a 2,000-year-old. So that
interesting.
was that thought process as far as why not Protestantism, and what was the two things that had the biggest influence on me choosing the Catholic Church were obviously my mother and the Journey Home. She
Mm,
recommended that I start watching that show, and that was
okay.
very influential because the people there believed what I'd been taught, and they were able to explain why they no longer believed it. And once again, because of the way my father raised me, and because of the gifts God has given me as far as the way my mind works, it I could not deny that what they said made sense. I
Yeah.
want to deny it, but I'm not good at that. That's why I think I basically said I didn't stop believing in God. I just didn't like him because I couldn't logically convince myself that there was no God. So I was just like, I hate him. Same thing. Like I can't. There's all these people that have been studying scripture in this church for thousands. This person built off this person built off this person, and I'm
Yeah.
going to do everything they've said because this 32-year-old minister decides that he knows better. Why should
Yeah.
I trust? Because one of the things I'm very aware of is how distorted my understanding can be because of my experiences. I was a
Yeah.
pothead, I was an alcoholic, I abused pornography, I had sex with people of the same sex outside of marriage. All of these things are part of my formation. So I cannot be formed by the things of the world and distortions and think that they don't affect the way I view everything.
Yeah.
So I have to turn to someone who I can trust that doesn't have the filter I have. And
Mm,
once again, I don't know that Protestant minister. I don't know if he's looked at porn like I did. I don't know if he's had sex outside of marriage or been a drug addict. But I know that the church has this long history of people who have not lived the way I've lived, who have
mm,
consistently built off of each other and come to the same conclusions that the people on the journey home were sharing with me. And so I made a conscious choice to believe them,
wow.
despite how it felt. I didn't understand the concept of an act of the will at that time, but that is what I did.
Yeah.
I made a decision that either I'm going to believe this or I'm not. And if I believe
Yeah.
it, then I have to believe it, even if it doesn't make sense. Like the Virgin Mary, I didn't want anything to do with her. I wasn't praying to saints. I didn't understand adoration. I understood none of that. But I told God that I wanted to know the truth, even if the
Yeah.
truth is the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I submitted first, which seems to be the opposite. Most people want the explanation first, then
Yeah.
they'll submit. And I am not naturally that way, so I would assume that was something that God guided me into, was to say,
Yeah.
all right, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that's what I
Yeah.
did.
No, yeah, no, it's so weird because the same thing happened to me. The Blessed Virgin Mary praying to the saints and asking for their intercession. All the doctrine, the real presence, whatever it was. I realized once I decided first to believe the thing, the understanding came later, and that always annoyed me. And I was like, at this point, I'm at the point where if there's something that comes up, I'm like, the church has an answer. I'm gonna trust the church first, and I'm sure the answer will come, even if it's not until like months later. It always comes, no matter what, as annoying as it is. But that's kind of, in some ways, how it has to be. But I think in some ways, it's evocative of, reversing what happened in the garden, right? Where, Adam and Eve, they wanted first the understanding and then the submission, but that's the disorientation, right? We need to submit first to God and then the understanding comes later. So no, that's perfectly poetic the way you just put that. Um, and so now that you're kind of at that point where you've converted, you're kind of like, wow, you're seeing the effects of grace, right? The breakthrough of grace has happened. You're in the Catholic Church. Um, Now my questioning might be more uh, ministerial at this point, which is you have same-sex attraction, and like the world says, well, if that's how you are, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's too late for you. Like, just live a life of what you just described, pleasure-seeking, gratification. Yet Jesus Christ calls us to do the opposite. He says, deny yourself, bear your cross, and follow me, which extends to everybody, whether they have same sex attraction or they're attracted to, the opposite sex. right? The call is the same, whether they're addicted to alcohol, pornography, video games, their phone, whatever it is, deny yourself, bear your cross, and follow him. But it seems to me that in the culture war that we're fighting, a lot of what the world would say is that something like same-sex attraction is so, extreme that it's impossible for somebody with same-sex attraction to be part of the holy Catholic Apostolic Church. It is impossible for them to be religious, to be spiritual, which I think is kind of fatalistic and nihilistic in some sense, right? But I guess for you, somebody who's lived that life, been all in on it, and sort of seen, in a sense, kind of the gratification you get from it, but also its lows. For you, what is the motivation? What inspires you to maintain self mastery, maintain self denial, and carry that cross of having such a unique, perhaps temptation, and yet to just be like, nope, I don't care if I have this. I'm going to deny myself and do what Christ tells me to do. What's that motivation for you? What is it that keeps you going? I guess is the best way to put it.
Well, I don't believe that my life is supposed to be easy. I mean, that's something that my father taught me. Um, so having that as a in the background, operating in the background, is helpful, because if you think your life is supposed to be easy, then you're going to naturally gravitate towards whatever you feel.
Mm,
I One of the gifts that God has given me is that I remembered being attracted to girls. I remember that when people started calling me gay, that I never wanted to hold a boy's hand. I never wanted to kiss a boy. I never wanted to have anything to do sexually with boys until I was exposed to pornography.
mm,
So because I have that gift, which most people I know with same-sex attraction do not have any memory of ever being attracted to the opposite sex. Because I had that, that was something that I am able to remind myself that this is not who I am. This is
mm,
something I feel because of circumstances. Part of the circumstance may be, whatever I was born with, as far as not believing in the idea that I was born gay, but that I was born with certain sensitivities. And then
mm,
living with those sensitivities and having the issues that I had with my dad and with my brother, other people may have that and they don't turn towards same sex attraction. My particular mix of things and what I was exposed to pushed me in a certain direction.
yeah.
um, Understanding that that is not my identity is part of what keeps me going. Just like it's part of what kept me going, getting off weed and stop using gaming and all the rest of it. Because if none of it is who I am and it's not satisfying me or it's not fulfilling me or whatever you want to call it, however you want to say it, um, having that knowledge is what I don't depend on it. Obviously, I depend on Jesus and the church, but it's operating in the background to
Mm,
remind me. I mean, I was able to tell people at the courage meetings over the last few months, I would never describe myself as being gay. I would never describe myself as being same sex attracted even. Do I have same sex attraction sometimes? Do I experience it? Yes. But most of the time I do not. Once I started reestablishing a healthy relationship with my mother, with my brother, and those three things changed me, because part of the reason I was acting out the way I was because of underlying things that were going on.
mm,
I don't think we have an understanding of how much of a dumping ground our sexuality is and how
mm,
many of our problems get dumped into there for us to process them somehow. I saw a long time ago about weird sexual things, and one of the people on there was attracted. She wanted to marry the Berlin Wall. Now, obviously, when I saw that, it was very obvious to me that she's not attracted to a wall. So there's something else going on in the background that she's not
mm,
aware of, and she's acting on it in this way because it's all she knows how to do. That helped me understand myself better, because
mm,
I don't know how to deal with whatever it is. I have more of an understanding now with therapy, what is in the background, why I may be having these attractions. Like if I see a guy that looks a way that I would like to look, my mind goes to wanting to consume him in some way, have sex with him or something like that. But I understand what's behind it. So I don't identify myself by it, and I don't act on it necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, so that's part of what is different for me. I know a lot of people don't remember ever being attracted to the opposite sex. And what I've told them is if you break your arm when you're 6 months old and your arm heals in the wrong direction, you may grow up thinking your arm was already turned backwards, but you
Mm,
know it was broken at some point. So just because you don't remember why you're attracted to the same sex doesn't mean it's natural.
mm,
That's that's reality. Just because you
mm.
don't remember something, and that's how most people operate. Well, I don't remember ever liking women. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? I mean, I know what target audience is. So this, if you need to edit this out, if it's too graphic, two penises they don't work together. Two vaginas they don't work together. Penis and a
Mhm.
vagina together. So we can look at our bodies and understand that we were designed to work a certain way. If our
Mm,
attractions are contrary to what our bodies show us the way things work, we're
yeah.
supposed to correct ourselves and not say, well, I just need to find some other part to use, which is
Yeah.
basically what we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
That So that's kind of
That's kind
what
of what
I'm
the.
receiving grace from Jesus Christ constantly. I go to Mass daily now. I go to confession as often as I need to. I still struggle with my sexuality. It's not like I've conquered it. I still have issues. I don't have issues in hooking up. I've not had any kind of relationship or anything like that.
Yeah.
But pornography is still something that I have to have filters on every single device that I'm around. I'm visiting my mom right now. I have a filter on her computer. I have a filter on my computer. I have a filter on my phone because
Mm,
it's not conquered for me. But I know who I am. And I am not
yeah.
a gay man that's denying my identity. There is only one sexuality. There is no homosexuality. There is heterosexuality or there are deviations from it.
Mm,
That's the reality. There is nothing else. The whole idea of homosexuality is a lie, in my opinion. You're
wow.
teaching people to identify themselves as something different from other people because they have a feeling. I don't care about my feelings. I care
Mm,
about what is reality. And reality is I'm designed for a woman. So I have to figure out some way to be with a woman in some way, whether it's marriage, whether it's the Virgin Mary, whether it's being married to the church in some way, whatever way that is, having female friends, things like that.
yeah.
Um, I'm not, I have no confusion in my mind or my heart over whether or not I'm a gay man that's in denial.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Wow. No, I would ask then, like, what would your advice be for people that, you've touched on it a little bit, but to kind of add a bit of a nuance here, what would your advice be for people that say, like, oh, but I never remember being attracted to the opposite sex. For as long as I can remember, I was always attracted to boys as a boy or a girl as a girl. What would you say to people like that, where it's like, well, yeah, you can remember, but I don't. Like, you say it's natural, but it's like, I don't feel that way. Like, what do you do with people that kind of have that disposition of like, but it's just impossible for me. It's not possible. Like I'll always be attracted to people of the same sex. What do
mhm.
you say to people that sort of think that way or sort of are disposed that way?
It depends on whether or not they have if they're Catholic, if they believe what the church teaches, there's one way I would say to approach them. If there's someone who's just a worldly person, then
Yeah.
I mean, all you can do is argue that naturally their bodies show them how their bodies are supposed to be used.
Mm,
Um, those body parts do not work together. During the sexual act, at the end of the sexual act, a fluid is produced that is designed to go into the woman and interact with an egg to produce a life.
yeah.
That means that fluid is produced for that purpose,
Yeah.
which means the act has that purpose as its natural end. So for
Mm,
someone that's not religious, I would just tell them that that's what our bodies show us. I understand your
yeah.
feelings are not in alignment with that. But if your feelings
Yeah.
are not in alignment with what your body shows you is reality and what biology tells you is the function of sexual intercourse outside of pleasure, then you have to align yourself with that or you're not living reality.
Mm.
Say the
Okay.
same thing
Yeah.
to a religious person,
Yeah. Yeah.
but a religious person you would add, do you believe you have authority over yourself to determine what is right and wrong, good and true? Or do you believe that God has that authority? If
Yeah.
you don't really have the relationship with God that you claim you do. If you do
Yeah.
believe that, then he will help you like he's helped me. He may not help you in the same way. If you and I both break our leg, my leg may heal and I limp. Your leg may heal and you walk like nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
may be pulled from my same sex attraction to the point where I know who I am, but I'm still drawn to men and I don't necessarily have a desire for marriage. Where someone else may be completely healed and someone else may struggle with it for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
It's part of the way that's part of being a human being. We all
Yeah.
have feelings that we can't give into. I would like to punch people sometimes. I would like to ram someone because they don't go through the crosswalk quick enough. I don't really, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feelings we have that we know we shouldn't give into. So to say to me that because you have a feeling means you have no choice but to act on it or you're not being your true self is ridiculous.
Yeah. I and maybe to kind of push on it, I get the question for somebody who is non-religious. Like, why would I need to be punished for, engaging in my pleasures? It's like, okay, I get what you're saying about the biology of it all, but why the punishment? Why is it wrong for me to engage in those acts? Like, why would God's wrath be poured upon me for eternity? Like, how would
Well,
you kind of answer that?
the way I would explain that, God's if I had a son and I saw him doing something that I knew was doing something to him that would separate him from me, I would be angry about that. I would be angry at whatever thing he did that separated him from my love. That's what these
Mm,
behaviors do, and that's what sin is. It's something that separates us from the love of God. When we choose to engage in those behaviors, they do something to who we are as a person that makes us unable to be in God's presence because we are choosing to put our own will and our own judgment above His. So it's not Him saying, I think it's kind of gross what you do, and if you do it, I'm going to send you into the basement and torture you for eternity.
yeah.
That's not what it is. It's you saying, you know what, God, I know better than you, and I'm going to do what I want, no matter what you say, but I don't want there to be any repercussion. There's
Mm,
repercussions for every decision we make in our life. If I
yeah.
choose to eat a whole bag of potato chips tonight, I'm going to be more likely to get a pot belly. That's not unfair. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
God designed us. If you told the designer of a lawnmower that it was unfair that the engine requires gasoline, does that make
Mm,
any sense?
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
because he designed the engine. So
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
determines how it works. We believe that we are designed by God and he knows what is best for his children, his creation. And if you choose to put perfect in your gas tank with gas, God will allow you because he wants you to choose to love him freely. But there will
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
a consequence. And that's
Yeah.
what it is. It's not him
It's
disliking
not
because you're
arbitrary, I think, is what people may be confused with. I think it's sort of like just this arbitrary punishment. It's like, oh well, he made me this way, and so he just wants to punish me, and there's nothing I can do. It's like, no, it's not quite that. It's something like, when you understand that there's an order to the universe, there's a truth, a goodness, and a beauty to the universe, and the very thing that is that essence, you know, which is God Himself, right? The source of truth, goodness, and beauty itself, right? There is a minutia to how can I say it? Maybe a little less out there. There's a certain way in which we can orient ourselves towards that truth, goodness, and beauty. And every little action, yeah, affects whether we're pursuing truth, goodness, and beauty or not. And so when we engage in these lusts and desires and these carnal pleasures, we're disposing our soul against that in some form or fashion, right? what happens when we engage in, say, lust, whether it be oriented toward the same sex or oriented toward the opposite sex, is we become more animalistic. We become more concave than ourselves. And all we want to do is just have more of that pleasure. We want to like, we're addicted to the pleasure. And what does that do is it keeps us from contemplating the higher things of life, the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of the universe. And then so that's why, this, moral code of don't engage in your attraction, whether it be same sex or opposite sex, in this manner, because you're simply creating for yourself that addiction, and that addiction causes a contortion in the soul that makes you voluntarily want to be against truth, goodness, and beauty, which is what God is. Does that kind of maybe hit the point a little bit? Also, I hope that kind of contributed a bit. Yeah, yeah. Oh, good. So yeah, and so it sounds to me kind of like, in a sense, what you're saying is that it's not impossible to have same-sex attraction and be Christian. Like it's not impossible, which is something I hear a lot of people, in that lifestyle say. It's like, oh, I could never be religious because I have same-sex attraction. But it sounds to me like you've come across, not just in your own experience, but other people that have the same attraction and yet are all in on Catholic Christianity of all things, right? They submit to the authority of the church, they submit to the authority of Christ himself. Um, I guess now my question would be kind of twofold, and then maybe we can kind of get to the more fun questions here that I have. What would your advice be for first the youth that kind of experience the struggle or are all in on the same sex attraction experience? What would your advice be for them? Maybe cater towards both the religious and non-religious, but we'll focus on the non-religious today. What would your advice be for them? People that are, younger, maybe 25 and younger, roughly, that have same-sex attraction and are like, oh, being religious is out of the question for me. What would your advice be for them if you had any off the top of your mind?
I mean, for me, like I said, when I first turned back to Jesus, it was um, me living with him the way I was able to live with him.
Mm,
Um, if I had tried to live the way I'm living now, coming back to the church in the beginning, I don't think I would have come back to the church. So I would say to them to be open and don't dismiss everything. I mean, read and study and listen to stuff about the church that has nothing to do with sexuality. Your sexuality is an important part of who you are, but it's not your entire identity.
mm,
So if you're not able to approach Christ because of the teachings of ministers or the church or whatever uh, uh, regarding sexuality, then don't deal with that at first.
mm,
Listen to the teachings of the church on other issues. I mean, obviously, there are homilies posted every single day from
yeah,
EWTN or from different priests in different communities that have nothing to do with sex. Our church is not obsessed with sex, contrary to what
yeah,
most people believe.
yeah,
It's not something we talk about on a regular basis because it's not the focus of what the church is about necessarily. So that's what I would say to anyone is if you're struggling in a certain area with something that the church teaches, then don't deal with that part yet. Just
mm,
say a simple prayer. God to help you know the truth. And don't put
yeah,
any qualifications on it. Don't put any restrictions on it. Just say that
yeah, yeah.
simple prayer and say it every day and mean it. When you start hearing
Mm,
things that you're not comfortable with, let them be. Maybe don't comment on videos for a while. Watch videos that challenge you and say nothing and just let it be. That's very
contemplate on it.
hard. I'm not saying anything that I'm good at necessarily. That doesn't mean that it's not true. It's
Yeah,
very hard. We've been taught that we have to speak back to everything we don't understand, and everything has to make sense to us. You'll never get
yeah.
anywhere if that's the way you operate. So that would be my suggestion. Just
Wow.
find someone who you can listen to and listen to them. The
Yeah,
only time you're going to hear stuff about your sexuality is if you go looking for it for the most part. And be
yeah,
open to Jesus leading you in whatever
yeah.
direction, whatever way he chooses.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I find that fascinating, and sometimes even I kind of forget But that's oftentimes the case. I told you about this book a while ago when we had that first conversation, but the book by Jackie Hill Perry, Gay Girl, Good God, where she talks about how the mistake a lot of us, people that are, attracted to people of the opposite sex tend to do is we tend to focus on the sexuality aspect of it. And she goes, no, 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 that's not the only good news, right? People with same sex attraction also struggle with lying. They also struggle with, the sins that we all have, right? They struggle with disobedience towards their boss. They struggle with, uh, you know, bad relationships with their parents, friends. They struggle with, envy. They struggle with, sloth and laziness too. And maybe that's kind of the indirect angle that they need to hear, in the sense that, yeah, it's not just your sexuality that needs to be corrected. In fact, that's a really small thing in comparison to other things, right? If you're a chronic liar, it's like, hey, maybe let's address that first before we get into anything else,
Maybe don't even start with anything needing to be corrected. Maybe
Mm,
start with the fact that God loves you now.
mm,
He loves you as a liar. He loves you as a promiscuous person or a drug addict,
yeah,
or he does not love you any less. So let him love you as you are, and know that he's going to walk with you as you are. And he will give you many opportunities to turn away from certain behaviors and certain
yeah,
ideas and understandings. And it's up to
mm,
you whether you choose to take them. If you want to be in
yeah,
communion with the Holy Catholic Church, there are certain choices you will have to make, but you don't have to make them right away. When I first started going to mass again, I was still looking at porn regularly. I was still being entertained by violence. I used foul language all the time.
yeah,
So I think it scares people off to think that this is all about changing. God will
yeah,
change you, but you don't need to come to him because you think you need to change. You need to come to him because you want his love.
yeah, yeah, yeah. To be loved by the very source of truth, goodness, and beauty. Absolutely. And I think even for me, when I think back to when I had initially converted, right? Not every, initial vice that I was struggling with was corrected immediately, but it happened over the course of time, right? God first wants to know you, yeah. And I think this is where some people kind of get it wrong, is that God loves you as you are, yes, but that doesn't also mean that over the course of time, as your relationship with Him grows, you know, the union you have with Him will oftentimes sometimes be impeded by the vice you choose to hold on to, and you're going to see the consequence of that a bit more clearly than you would otherwise. So yeah, but no, you're absolutely right when it comes to, right, the initial exposure, right? Love first, faith first, grace first, and everything else kind of naturally falls together, which I think, sometimes a mistake that we make as evangelists and apologists is, preaching the repentance all the time, which, yes, is a primary pillar, but it's not the only pillar of faith that Christianity rests upon. Would you say that, before we get into the fun questions, like your advice for perhaps people who are older with same-sex attraction would kind of be the same? Would it be something else? How would you kind of word the advice differently to people that are older, maybe like 25, 30-ish or older?
Only thing I would say if you're older is that at some point you have to put, it says in scripture that we will, as we grow older, we'll put childish things aside. They're not going to naturally fall away. Your desire to play video games is not going to just disappear necessarily. Your desire to hang out with your friends and do the things you did when you were 12 or 20, those are things that you're going to have to make a choice. You
Yeah.
will have to choose what matters most in your life. Just like if you get married, you have to choose that your spouse matters more. When you have children, you make choices in those directions. So, I mean, people have to be willing to sacrifice. They can't say they want to have a better body, but I'm not going to go to the gym and I'm still going to eat pork rinds every day. Then you're not going to have a better body and you don't really want it. And that's okay. But
Yeah.
don't tell yourself, I want to be closer to God, or I want to know God, or I want to feel more loved by God, or whatever, but I won't do anything to make that happen. Then you
Hmm.
don't want it. And that's all right. You should just be more honest with yourself so that there's more of a possibility you can change, because change comes through being clear and honest with yourself, in my opinion, not deluding yourself and telling yourself what makes you feel better.
Mm.
Um, and just remember, to the people that are older, that as you get older, it just gets more difficult. Your habits become more ingrained, the neural pathways become deeper, and
Yeah,
turning down from behaviors that you may know when you're 28 you need to stop because they're not good for you are not
yeah,
going to go away more easily when you're 45. It just
yeah,
gets harder. So if you are younger and you are realizing that you want to make a turn, start making the turn as soon as you can.
yeah. No, yeah, yeah. I really like that advice. I think sometimes, people don't want to hear that they need to grow up. And for a time I struggled with like, oh, but being young and all that stuff. That's like it feels really good, but it's like no, no, no. Sometimes the advice people need to hear is grow up, get over yourself. And as I mean, I'm not like that old, but even see my friends where they're still addicted to video games. They're still doing stuff that I'm like you got to get over it, dude. Like I can't be like, oh, you don't want to go do this because you got to play video. It's like, dude,
And these
get
are
over
the same people
yourself.
that complain about the way the world is, and oh, there's the poor people this and these. Right. Well, then you know what? If you care so much about what you claim to care about, you care about the poor, you care about the whatever. Why don't you turn off your games and go do something about it? And if you're not willing to do that, why don't you be quiet? Really, stop saying you care about the poor, you care about the environment while you sit in your room all day acting like a 12-year-old child. Put your money where your mouth is or be quiet. It's
Yeah.
simple. See, you don't really care about what you say you do if you will do nothing.
Mm,
And I think it's a
yeah.
loving thing to kindly as you can, point that out to your friends.
Yeah.
But you don't really want to change. You don't really want to be more environmentally conscious when you do absolutely nothing to bring it
Yeah.
about, except complain about everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, I love that advice. Sometimes it's just you gotta rip the band-aid off and just sort of say the thing that needs to be
Right?
said. That's
Yeah.
perfect. um, so yeah, with that being said, we're an hour and 20 minutes in. I kind of want to get through some fun questions, and then there were just a couple final questions, and then we will wrap this conversation up. So the first one that I had that I think that just really, I think, an interesting point of conversation that I like. Um, in your growth in the faith. You encounter a lot of what Catholic spirituality is. But for you, and even for me, one of my favorite things for me is understanding people's patron saints. And, to me, the way I understand the patronage of the saints, it's kind of the way in which God wants us to know him uniquely catered to us. So like for me, St. Paul is my patron saint because of his evangelistic wisdom, but then also his, knowledge and insight about the way in which God works. I love that. Whereas other people might like specifically guys like Thomas Aquinas or Saint Joan of Arc, because God wants people to know him in a certain way, and it's always catered to us. So for you, who is your patron saint or multitude of them, and why do you think God chose those saints for you?
The first thing when I was being confirmed, I wasn't confirmed until I was in my 30s. I chose St. Thomas More
Okay.
because he was willing to die for what he believed in.
Okay.
Um, so that was the initial choice of my own. But
Yeah.
then the saints that were given to me, St. Francis, St. Teresa of Calcutta, and I'm not
Okay.
a saint yet, but Mother Angelica. The reason
Mm,
I believe those three saints were sent to me is because they were selfless, they were willing to suffer, and
mm,
they were willing to. I mean, they all had to detach from their families. I mean, Mother Angelica literally had to, tell her mother she was going on a retreat, and she just never came home because her mother, she knew, would never let her leave. St. Teresa of Calcutta had, I don't know if she had a difficult relationship with her mother, but I know that she wasn't able to go back and see her, and that caused her a lot of suffering. That I believe her
yeah.
mother may have died. I don't know, so I won't say anymore. But I know she had an issue with her family, and then obviously St. Francis. I mean, his father thought he had gone crazy and basically beat him up at a certain point. So all these people had
Remind me
been
real quick. St. Francis de Sales or St. Francis of
of
Assisi?
Assisi.
Okay, of Assisi. Okay, yeah.
And I knew that these saints were sent to me because, being perfectly honest, I don't really care for Franciscan spirituality and interaction with Franciscans.
Yeah.
The Franciscans that I've come in contact with, I'm not saying this is true of all of them, have been very gay friendly. Gay friendly means gay affirming,
Yeah.
encouraging me to be a boyfriend, telling me there's nothing wrong with masturbation, that it's a natural act. So I know from my aversion to Franciscans that the fact that Mother Angelica and St. Francis, I would have never picked them. And I would never have picked Mother Teresa of Calcutta because I
Yeah.
frankly am not drawn to her. So I'm just being honest. I'm not
Yeah.
saying I care for the poor more, and I know that I should, but that's why I believe those three people were sent to me because they were selfless. Mother Angelica had to grow in humility. St. Francis had to grow in humility, and these are areas that I struggle in. So those are the saints that I have a litany that I pray to every day. Other saints that I think about, St. John the Silent is the one that I read about in the books that I was telling you about.
Yeah.
So I have all sorts of saints that I pray to each day, but those are my crew is how I
Nice.
prefer.
Yeah. Now, when you see them in heaven, they're like, "Hey, you remember? It'll be cool. That union."
You made it.
They're gonna be like, "Oh, you remember when you did this thing?" And you're gonna be like, "Oh no."
Yeah. Like you
So
saw
yeah,
that. You saw it all.
no, yeah, like for me, like fun. I actually just got. I gotta show you this just because it's really cool. So I got Rembrandt's depiction of Saint Paul
Mm.
here,
Mm.
and I love it. It's evocative of oftentimes what it is to contemplate God, right? Just this sort of like, the kind. I don't know if it's despair is not the word I'm looking for, but maybe stressed of like, oh man, I love you so much, God, but I want other people to know you, and you're just like, oh, I wish the world knew you the way I knew you, and that's what that image evokes for me. But then I have my other two patron saints. I have Saint Gemma, who's kind of known as like the silent sufferer of the cross, where she in her diaries talks about you know a lot. Her theme mainly is to suffer is to know Christ, and then she sort of combined a lot of that with the mystical experiences that she was gifted with, which I relate to personally because when I came out of the New Age, I had a lot of kind of this mystical experience with Christ that I feel like Saint Gemma, and I kind of have a certain way to relate with each other in that regard. But then I have another saint, Saint Maria. Her story, I just the first time I heard it, I was brought to tears. But also, Father Chad Ripperger in his book, I think Deliverance Prayers to the Laity, when it comes to exorcising, like exorcising demons of lust, Saint Maria Goretti is a saint he finds to be very effective, and that oftentimes if I find myself looking at a woman with lust, Saint Maria Goretti or the Blessed Mother tend to be the two saints that when I invoke, the lust goes away, respectively for different reasons. But yeah, like I love that's why I love this thing so much because it's they're the flavor by which God wants you to know Him. Oftentimes, the saints who are given and gifted tend to juxtapose us the way you were describing, right? Or sometimes they tend to sort of be in harmony with us, And I think God knows what each of us needs. So it's so cool to sort of see that.
I think Mother Angelica and I definitely are in harmony. She had a
Yeah,
mouth that needed to be tamed, and she had a temper. So
yeah,
we definitely have that.
that's really cool. Favorite prayer or chaplet that you have, or litany that you do, and why do you feel drawn to that?
Well, I pray that the oh my gosh, give me 1 second. Um, what are the prayers? It's not the angelic warfare confraternity. It's the Auxilium Christianorum.
Mm,
I pray those prayers every day.
okay.
They're battle prayers. That's
Yeah.
why I like them. I like
Okay.
the idea that we have to fight. I know that I have to surrender to Christ and let Him fight for me. But
Yeah.
reading the lives of the saints and some of the other books that I've read, I think we have a distorted understanding now of what surrender means. I think surrender to us means hands up, we don't do anything. And I don't believe that's necessarily what God meant by surrender. I think we
Yeah.
surrender by sacrificing and suffering, and that allows Him space to do His work. So fighting for my chastity, fighting for my true identity, fighting those, that's very appealing to me. So those are the prayers that everything that I pray, and I love the Liturgy of the Hours. I've been praying the
Well,
Liturgy of the Hours for many years, and
mhm.
uh, I feel closer to Christ through those Psalms daily.
Yeah.
Um, so those would be the two.
No, yeah, I remember when I visited a Dominican friary a few months ago, and yeah, they do the Liturgy of the Hours, and doing it with them and listening to them do it as a group and singing it. And I mean, all of them, they mastered their voice. They have a really cool singing voice, and when I sing, I
Mm-hmm.
sound like I'm screeching, right? But no, it was really cool. And like once I got to be immersed in what the Liturgy of the Hours is supposed to be, I finally understood it. I happen to I do the rosary. That's kind of my thing. I love the rosary. Just absolutely, just a masterful weapon against the devil. For me, I also do the St. Michael chaplet. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. That one's a very like, oh, we're here to fight kind of chaplet.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have my own saint chaplet that I do. That one's really awesome. I have basically what I do is with the rosary beads. Each rosary bead, so each Hail Mary bead is the invocation of a specific saint. So I have 50 different saints that I'll invoke in the Saint Chaplet. That's really cool. And then I also do the Seven Sorrows Rosary and
Mm-hmm.
then the Divine Mercy Chaplet. So I have like each day of the week I'll do a different chaplet. It's just really cool to do. And then a couple other questions before I get to the final two. Do you have a favorite book? So I know you mentioned Butler's Lives of the Saints, but are there any other books that you'd recommend for people that you just happen to love?
I mean, there's a book called, it's out of print from Father Harvey, who's the founder of the Courage Apostolate, the apostolate in the church, the only one that's approved by the church or sanctioned by
Okay.
the church for people with same-sex attraction. It's called The Homosexual Person.
Okay.
That book I think is very important. It's unfortunate that it's out of print. It's published by Ignatius Press, but he says things in there that I think people are afraid to say now, like talking about the idea of healing and that
Mhm.
your attractions can change and that people that have this attraction have an obligation to live very disciplined, structured, ascetic lives. Because if we don't live that way, we end up just living as bachelors, basically. There's a lot of very powerful stuff in there that, if people are open to hearing it, I think would have a deep impact on someone, especially someone who is exploring. They're not necessarily ready to leave it behind, but they know inside of themselves that something's just not right. I'm doing everything that they said would make me happy, and I
Yeah.
just something's not clicking. So
Mhm.
that book is something that I read recently. I read a lot, so there's that book, and I would just leave it there because I would have to sit here for 15 minutes and try to
Yeah.
think of.
Yeah. Yeah. No worries.
I'm also reading Be Healed right now from Dr. Bob Schutz. That's
Okay.
also very helpful. I mean, we believe, I was talking to a friend of mine today, we obviously, we're, we have concupiscence. We're very broken people, and a lot of the time our desires just come down to the fact that we want pleasure. But there is also stuff going on in the background that it does help to address. So that book, I think, is also very helpful for people that are at a point where they want to address the underlying issues that keep them turning to behaviors that they don't want to turn to, not just sexual, but other behaviors as well.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing those. And then do you have a word for people like Father James Martin or the more wishy-washy Franciscan that you were mentioning? And I know I talked to you about the parish here in Seattle, St. Joseph, which is a Jesuit parish that very affirming of, same-sex attraction, not just in the sense that they're trying to be nice and polite the way Courage Ministries is, but in the sense that it's like they're actively encouraging people to get married to people of the same sex and taking communion and all these things, and it's like it's proving to be a real scandal in the church. Do you have a word for
A whole
people
bunch
in
of words,
ministries like that?
a whole bunch of words. But I'm trying to learn to be more humble and more less of Garrett Johnson than I usually am. So what I would
Yeah,
say
no,
is
no,
they should read the book of Gomorrah from Saint Peter Damian, a doctor of the church. And what I
okay.
would say to them is, do you know better? Do you know better than the doctor of the church? I want you to say you do. I want to hear those words come out of your mouth. I know better than St. Peter Damian. I know better. Say it if you do. Say you know better than the doctor of the church. That's what I would say to them, because that's what they're saying by doing this, by encouraging these behaviors, by encouraging people to live in a way that is contrary to what the church has always taught. They are saying, I know better. So say it. If you're so
Yeah.
bold to say it by your behavior, then be a man and open your mouth and say it.
Mm,
That's what I
yeah.
would say to them, because they are leading people astray. They are inflicting suffering on my brothers and sisters because
Yeah.
they think they know better, because they have a, a wussy understanding of what it means to be compassionate and merciful.
Yeah.
Compassion and mercy are found in truth,
Yeah.
truth in love. And it is
Yeah.
loving to say to someone, what you are doing is destructive, and I will not affirm you in behavior that is not good for you. I love you. If
Yeah.
you choose to not allow me to love you because I will not affirm you in behavior that I believe is not good for you, that is your choice. But I
Yeah.
am telling you that I love you.
Yeah.
Love is to will the good of the other. That's what the church they claim to follow
Yeah.
teaches. So
Mm,
if you're a Catholic priest, if you're a bishop, if you're in a position of power, submit yourself to the will of the church like we do.
mm.
Stop
I love
acting
that.
like you know better.
Yeah.
That's what I would say to them respectfully. I do respect priests. I respect bishops. I
Yeah.
believe that
Oh
these
yeah. Yeah.
people are trying to figure out a way to get to people like me who live in darkness. And obviously, if someone's in a cave, you don't yank them out into the sunlight and force them to look directly into the light. You try to bring
Yeah.
them out slowly, but you have to bring them out. And they are
Yeah.
not bringing people out. They're encouraging, stay in the cave. You're
Yeah.
fine in this. Jesus understands. That's a lie. They're
Yeah.
lying.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
liars. I'm not saying that, but they are lying. And they are
Yeah. Yeah.
contradicting doctors of the church.
Yeah. Not very well put. I never had my own encounters with the priest at St. Joseph's that I was talking about. And man, it's insane to see. When confronted, they don't act in charity. Suddenly, they're not all inclusive. Suddenly, they're all like hostile and all these other things. And so they kind of know. They know deep down that what they're doing is contorting the truth. And but this is, I think, uh, evocative of what it means to engage in spiritual combat, right? Even though the gates of hell are going to try and prevail against the church, ultimately we know, Christ wins in the end. So, we got to keep fighting the good fight, like you were saying. Nevertheless, I'll get to the final two questions, then we can kind of wrap it up. But, especially with Courage International, right? That's a ministry that's orthodox. It is beautiful. It's Catholic. It's Christian. What have you found that they teach that makes it different? I know you mentioned, the five goals of courage and living in chastity, but can you expand on what their mission is and, what you would recommend for people when it comes to maybe seeking out a ministry like this?
Well, I mean, what the core of it is that this is not our identity. That our identity is we are sons and daughters of God created in his image. That is who
Mm,
we are. We have all sorts of feelings that we have been misled into believing that they are our identity. And we are all capable of doing what you said earlier, which is allowing ourselves to be guided by our feelings. We
yeah.
have to choose to submit to the church. That is
Hmm.
what it means to be Catholic, is to submit to the authority of the church. So to
Yeah.
say I'm a Catholic person, but I also am going to continue to do whatever I want, then you are not submitting, and you need to question yourself. That wasn't your question. So, what
No,
is
no worries.
courage different? It teaches us to be friends with people of the same sex without being sexual with each other. Does that mean that we don't have, things get confused? I mean, you're dealing with a group of people who all have the same attraction, who are all trying to learn how to be friends. And a lot of
Yeah.
men have not had friends of the same sex. It's been sexualized. So there's a lot of learning going on. There's a lot of challenges, but we have good priests who are the chaplains. There are spiritual fathers. They help to guide us. They correct us when we need to be corrected lovingly. They lead us, and they do the best they can to help us grow as men and women. But they do not affirm us in a lie to make us feel better. And that's what makes them different than all these other groups who claim to minister to people with same-sex attraction. You're not ministering to people if you're encouraging them to stay involved in a lifestyle and a behavior that the church teaches is destructive to their soul.
Mm.
That's what courage offers, the truth in love. I have never felt beat up by a priest or a person there. I've never felt disrespected or unloved. It's a very loving, welcoming environment, but it is challenging because everyone there is trying to grow. And when we're trying to grow closer to Christ, the enemy is going to whack us around, which he does. It is
Yeah.
not, it's not a social club. Though we do socialize together, we have events at people's houses. We're trying to learn how to be friends.
Yeah.
Uh, but the main difference for me is that they tell us the truth. They do not compromise,
Mm.
even if it makes you uncomfortable.
Wow. That's really cool. And it's awesome to see that, kind of in the climax of, the movement of people, embracing pride, so to speak, both as an ideology, but also as a vice. You see ministries like this, you sort of see that the devil kind of undoes himself, where the very thing he thought was his most effective tool, as we see now, kind of with Courage International, is the very thing that God uses to work grace through the world and through people. And so it's really awesome to sort of see that, there's always a way for us to adapt to what is Satan's next move. And it's really awesome that you're a part of that. You're kind of on the front lines of that. Um, something you mentioned in our last call, you know, it's not just saying no to a part of you, but it's saying yes to something else, right? It's not just saying no to, oh, this desire that I have, but it's saying yes to what is the kind of life we're supposed to be living, a life of contemplation. I think Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, right, says that the highest and greatest, way to live life is not a life of pleasure, not a life of politics, but a life of contemplation. You're saying yes to a life where you're contemplating the truth of the universe, the beauty of the cosmos, the goodness of people, the goodness of reality itself. And that's kind of the goal. It's not just merely to say, don't do this and live your life based on what you're not told to do or told not to do, but to, explore the depth of the universe, explore, the mystical experiences of Catholic and Orthodox Christianity. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're saying yes to something greater, but you have to give up a part of yourself, yes, but that's not the whole picture. So, well said.
Right. I mean, sure says either we're married to a spouse or we're supposed to serve God and His church.
Yeah,
So you can't just say, "Well, I'm fine. I don't masturbate anymore," or "I stopped looking at porn," or "I don't call myself gay. I now say I'm SSA instead of gay," and think that that's enough. It's not enough. You have to sacrifice. Father Harvey said in his book that we need to be living lives that are ascetic. We
yeah,
need to be making sacrifices because if not, we're going to end up bachelors and bachelorettes. That's what the
yeah,
world wants. It wants people that just sit around and um, don't grow in any way to be divinized. I mean, our
yeah,
goal in our lives is to die resembling Jesus Christ. It's not
yeah,
enough to just be saved. We have to look like him, and we can't look like him without making sacrifices. And the men and women in courage, in my opinion, I believe part of the reason God allowed this cross in our life is because he needs men and women to sacrifice in this way, to not
Yeah.
just say no to living out these distorted sexual desires, but also saying, I will live as a husband or wife married to the church and
Yeah.
sacrifice for her the way I would for a husband or wife. There are many people encouraged who are married, so obviously that's different if you're married. But to think that
Yeah.
we can just live a single life with no goal, no sacrifice, outside of just saying I'm not gonna do sexual things anymore, I think is a misunderstanding.
Yeah. And it's a limited view too. It's not just like, oh, I'm no longer going to do what is my worst vice, but I want to pursue what is my most difficult virtue. It's an entirely different world in terms of, how you live out the faith. Nevertheless, you did mention, people encourage being married to people of the opposite sex, which is, hold on now, that's actually a big thing to say. People who are gay or lesbian would claim it's impossible for me to get married to somebody of the opposite sex, but you seem to experience the opposite thing, encourage. Would you say you believe that people who experience same-sex attraction can successfully marry somebody of the opposite sex despite their sexual disposition? And how do you think that happens? What do you think that looks like?
I think everybody's different. You can't say one thing will work for everybody, but your
Yeah.
sexual attraction, married men want to sleep with other women. They don't do it. Now, obviously, I do believe, I mean, I don't believe that wanting to have sex with the same sex is the same as someone wanting to have sex with someone of the opposite sex outside of a marital union. I don't think those two things are the same, so I'm not saying that. But I do believe that you can have an attraction to another person that you choose to deny because you choose to make that sacrifice for the person you love. I think part of it comes down again to knowing the difference between lust and attraction.
Mm,
If you have no, I can't, I mean, for me, I see women that I find attractive. Um, I'm, I don't feel drawn to marriage at this point. If I were to meet a woman and I was attracted to her in that way, I would just tell her this is what I deal with. This is how I lived in the past. And if she was open to us having some sort of relationship, I mean, the way courting used to work was that you were friends first. You didn't meet and want to have sex the next day. Or maybe you did, but you didn't do it. Let's say that. You met and you courted. You went out to coffee for an hour first, and then maybe you went out to lunch, and then you went out to dinner, and then you went out to dinner frequently. And then as you got to know the person, your feelings developed. Now we have this idea that you're supposed to see this person and bang, you're supposed to know right away that you want to be with them. And if you don't, then that means you're not attracted. I don't believe that's correct. I think we have a completely screwed up way of viewing attraction.
yeah.
So fine, be honest. I mean, women in Washington, D.C., where I live, there's many more single women than there are available men.
Mm,
So I think that a lot of women, especially in the culture we live in now, where everything is much more open, if you just be honest with the woman and tell her, look, I'm attracted to you. I want to hang out with you, but I need you to know, and I'm not saying you say this in the first 5 minutes, that I've
yeah.
had this issue in the past, and it's something that I deal with. I think there are some women who would be open to that, and I don't think there's anything wrong as long as you are honest with you um, having a relationship with someone of the opposite sex, even if you experience same-sex attraction. But key to me, you have got to be honest with yourself, and you have got
Mm,
to be honest with that person and make sure that they understand what is going on and what it means for your relationship. But to
yeah.
say that because you have an attraction that's distorted or disordered or whatever, unnatural, whatever words people want to use, just because you have an attraction does not mean it's your identity. And once you
Yeah.
detach it from your identity, I think you're open to all sorts of things. But once you
Yeah.
think it's who you are, if you believe you are a gay man, then no, you have no business marrying a woman, in my opinion. But if you understand that you're a man who has an attraction that has roots that are things that probably need to be addressed, then I think you can be more open to that.
Mm, I see. No, yeah, yeah. I think that, especially in the culture, no matter like what the disposition you have romantically is, it's still sometimes just too fast. The culture is way like the order in which you know people is way too fast. It's the hookup culture especially, right? Have the most intimate experience with the person first, and then get to know them. It's like
Right,
no, it's the opposite. You need to
right.
like have a simple conversation with them, and then it's like it's harder, it's more difficult, and you don't want to do it, but it's like that's how people work. You need to have boundaries. You need to, the people that I know that they meet somebody and they're immediately like doing things they should be doing. It's like, oh, slow down there, like relax for a second, realize what you're doing. I get the temptation, but slow down, slow
Well,
way
right.
the heck down.
It should tell them that something is wrong if you're more comfortable having sex than you are talking.
Yeah.
If you're more comfortable hooking up with a complete stranger through an app than you are sitting down for a 30-minute conversation over coffee, something interiorly needs to be addressed before you meet anybody.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. No, the advice is definitely appreciated. With that, I am going to wrap this up. We're approaching 2 hours now. This was a wonderful conversation, very edifying, and I hope you, the viewer, found this conversation to be edifying. You can, use this in some sort of evangelistic way or just for your own personal spiritual development. But Garrett, before we wrap up, was there any last thing you wanted to say for the viewer before we get going here?
Just that I do consider it part of what I have been invited to do by the Lord to help people in this way, not just with issues with sexuality, but with issues with addictive behaviors like gaming and substance abuse and stuff like that. So I have a website, becomingagoodman.com. I have a book that will be coming out sometime in the next 6 months, hopefully, also called Becoming a Good Man. I'm on YouTube and I have a blog, and all of that is accessible on the website.
Awesome, nice. And then I will put the link to the website and the YouTube and all the book recommendations you gave in the description below, so that way you can find that and just explore
Also,
as your heart content.
Courage,
Yeah,
courage,
yeah, yeah.
couragerc.org. Just
Oh
go
yeah,
there. We have a ton of resources for family members, for loved ones, for people experiencing the attraction, and for clergy. If you want more information, there's different tabs that you click on depending on whether you're experiencing it or you're a loved one or something. They have
hmm
tons of videos and talks and all sorts of things available.
Sweet. Well, awesome. Well, Garrett, thank you so much for appearing on my channel. I thank you for your time. And with that, may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you always.